Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. This is the third workshop and the last workshop in our series on using AI in academic research. For those who may have missed the other two workshops, the first workshop was focused on exploring the use of AI in literature reviews, and the second workshop, we explored the use of AI for statistical analyses, qualitative analyses, as well as data visualization. And of course, recordings of those workshops are available if you would like to view them. Today, the last workshop in this series will focus on using AI as a research assistant and an evaluator in the research process. And so we will also explore using AI as the first peer reviewer. So a lot in store today. Today's workshop is going to follow a very similar format to prior workshops. We're going to showcase a series of mini experiments to give you a sense of how we're using AI in various capacities. And we're also going to give you a sense of how well AI functions in each context. And when possible, we'll share other similar studies and the findings from the literature so that you can see how well our pilot work stacks up against other available evidence in the literature. As always, our goal is to get you thinking about your own research projects and how the use of AI and how different AI examples that we discuss could be transferable to your own work. So hopefully as we go along, you're thinking about your own projects. So here are the various topics that we'll be highlighting in this presentation. And as a disclaimer, all of our mini experiments were conducted with the context of medical education research in mind, because that's my area of expertise. So that's why you're going to see a lot of those types of examples today. And so as part of the process that we'll walk through today, we're going to explore the use of AI for evaluating, rating, and grading. And these particular tasks are so similar in nature that we're going to consider those to be one and the same, right? And then next, we're going to use AI to conduct quality assurance analyses, which are a required component for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. Then we'll see how well AI can serve as a first reviewer. And we're also going to forecast into the future to anticipate how journals could start to implement AI manuscript screening processes. And then lastly, we'll see how well AI was able to provide feedback on an NSF grant. So we have a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to jump straight in and get right into the various experiments. So this first experiment was a full-scale experiment that is now under review for publication. And here we wanted to know whether AI could be used as a rater or grader in a research study. So recognize that within educational research, there are times when grading or rating components just needs to occur as part of the research process. And those data then become a core element of the data that are statistically analyzed. And when this is done, the graders or the raters are oftentimes going to use a rubric, and that, of course, helps to ensure consistency in how the raters are assigning their scores or their ratings. Now, to ensure that agreement between raters is strong enough, statistics such as Cohen's kappa or Fleece's kappa are used to evaluate inter-rater agreement. And so this first experiment that we've conducted was actually part of a larger project. So let me give you just a little bit more context and explain what we did so you can better position this piece of the project in the larger project as a whole. In the larger project, we wanted to answer the question, how can AI be used by students, or rather, can it be used by students, to accurately identify anatomical structures on unlabeled images? So for this study, we fed 2 different AI systems 3 different samples of images and prompts to see how well that each of these systems would perform on identifying unlabeled anatomical structures. And each sample that you see here, A, B, and C, was comprised of 15 different questions with images associated with them. And those images were of different modalities, such as illustrations and photographs and an MRI like you see here. And once we received all the outputs from ChatGPT 4.0 and from Claude Sonnet 3.5, we then had a team of anatomy experts rate the quality of the outputs. We had two teams. Team 1 rated the quality for the time point 1 outputs, and Team 2 rated the quality for the time point 2 outputs. And so the anatomy experts rated the accuracy of every output using this 3-point scale, which ranged from inaccurate, being 0, to fully accurate. And the graders were given textbook answers to help facilitate the grading process of the AI outputs. And you can see some of those example answers as shown below in the bottom image. The anatomy experts were also asked to rate every single output for superfluity as well. And so the second aim of this research project was really to determine whether AI could be used as a rater for this task in place of human raters. And so to accomplish this, we asked ChatGPT 01 Preview to execute the exact same grading task as the human anatomy experts. And then we evaluated the amount of agreement between the human ratings versus the AI ratings. And in regards to accuracy, the level of agreement between the human anatomy experts and the AI system ranged from substantial to almost perfect. And frankly, this is the best outcome that you can get, because notice below in pink font, you see that the agreement between human raters was very similar. Rater 1 versus Rater 2, the agreement was substantial agreement. And then for raters 3 and 4, they had almost perfect agreement. So for this rating task, AI did very well, and it could have been used as a substitute for a human rater. When AI was asked to make judgments about how superfluous the returned answers were, it did not fare as well. Agreement in this example ranged from slight to moderate. And one explanation for this is that in this particular scenario, there was no textbook answer to grade against. So it does make sense that AI struggled a bit more with this task of scoring superfluity. However, you might also notice at the bottom of the screen, again in pink, look at that agreement between human raters. They too also struggled a bit more here because their ratings and agreement were not as strong as they were previously. So notice that their agreement ranged from moderate to substantial for superfluity. So collectively, these outcomes suggest that AI can be used as a rater to augment human ratings in educational research, so long as all of these ratings are done using some sort of a detailed rubric or a structured framework that clearly defines the intended outcomes. If that framework is in place, then it seems like AI has no problem handling the task. So how do our findings compare to related literature? Well, in a meta-analysis of 15 studies that compared human versus AI for scoring English essays, the amount of agreement that was found was quite high. It was found to be 0.78. And so the outcomes of this meta-analysis are in alignment with our own findings as well. So based on these promising findings, I think it's plausible to use AI as a rater or a grader. And that could actually become very commonplace here in the near future within both educational practices as well as within research practices. So I feel like this is kind of the directionality that AI is headed in. All right, now let's look at a slightly different use case whereby we used AI for conducting quality assurance analyses. So the generally positive outcomes from our first experiment encouraged me to really think about other similar uses of AI and how I could implement AI in the current research that I'm doing and in my current research practices. And so the research process for conducting systematic reviews and meta-analyses immediately came to mind. And that's because as part of this process, the PRISMA guidelines recommend conducting a quality assurance analysis to ensure that all of the studies are of high enough quality to be included in the final analysis for a meta-analysis in particular. And so to conduct quality assurance analyses on medical education research papers, I often use a tool called MRSCI. That acronym stands for Medical Education Research Study Quality Instrument. And if MRSCI scores as assigned by human raters are less than or equal to 9, then I typically will discard those studies from the meta-analysis in order to increase study homogeneity, and my goal is also to reduce noise in the outcomes as well. But as you can imagine, if a meta-analysis has, let's say, 150 studies associated with it, it could be really, really time-consuming to have human raters assign MRSCI scores to every single study. And so enter the role of AI. Can AI assign accurate MRSCI scores compared to human evaluators? So for this mini experiment, I used 22 papers on the topic of educational escape rooms. This is a meta-analysis that I have published already, so I already had access to MRSCI scores that were evaluated by humans for these 22 papers. And so all 22 papers were run through 3 different AI systems. We used a custom chatbot that we trained, and we also ran the papers through ChatGPT-o1 and through ChatGPT-4o. And across the 22 empirical studies, ChatGPT-o1 returned significantly higher MRSCI scores than humans and all the other AI systems. And this was a bit of a surprise. It was an unexpected finding for us. We're still not sure exactly why ChatGPT-o1 returned higher scores. But notice if you look at human ratings or scores versus the custom chatbot versus ChatGPT-4o, in that scenario, no statistically significant difference was detected. So even though ChatGPT-o1's inflation of the MRSCI scores was an unexpected finding, I think there is still utility in this approach. So by using this approach, this AI-assisted method, we could actually receive 3 times the number of MRSCI scores that were all still quite similar to human ratings from across 3 different systems in less time than it took human raters to score each study individually 1 time. So effectively, what I'm saying is now with 3 times the number of data points, I think what would make sense is to take all of those data points and to generate an AI mean score. And as it turns out, if you look at that AI mean score statistically and compare it to the human scores, there was no statistical difference between the two. So for me, I think it kind of makes sense to run studies through 3 different platforms, let's say, then to also take that mean score and to use that mean score. So for me, the next time that I conduct a meta-analysis, I do find it very tempting to use this particular approach because 1, it was very quick and efficient, and 2, it does seem to be returning scores that are very, very comparable to human ratings. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Emily for just a little bit, and she's going to share some literature on using AI to provide feedback on manuscript drafts.
Thanks, Adam. You can advance the next slide. Great. All right, so I'm going to just give you all a little bit of a brief overview of some of the scholarship on the use of AI for writing feedback. Now, what I'm going to do on this slide is talk about 4 studies that examine the use of generative AI for formative feedback in graduate level writing. But before I do that, I just want to note that the scholarship in the field is still emerging. And as we'll see, many of the studies focus on students' responses or reflections regarding the use of AI in academic writing. And additionally, most of the peer-reviewed studies examined models that have long since been upgraded. So if we start with row 1 with Zirides et al. 2023, what we see is a comparison of AI and graduate level peer feedback in which both humans and AI applied a detailed rubric with 10 criteria. And the study found that AI reviews tended to be more extensive in terms of a higher word count, and that the AI also surpassed humans in terms of applying this detailed rubric while simultaneously applying structured feedback. There were, of course, limitations with this study, one being that ChatGPT 3.5 often struggled to critique theoretical aspects of graduate student work, and also to address some of the contextual subtleties of their research. Importantly, I think in terms of the study is the fact that the study didn't compare AI output with expert level feedback. Now, moving on to the next row, Parker 2024. This study used surveys and interviews regarding student and instructor perspectives on AI integration into a graduate level course and a Doctor of Healthcare Administration program. And here AI was used for a variety of tasks across the research cycle, not just for feedback. Additionally, multiple AI systems were used, including custom tools built by the instructor, as well as ChatGPT. The model wasn't specified, but it's likely ChatGPT 3.5 or 4. In terms of the key findings, the study revealed that the students indicated that they valued AI for its suggestions for technical improvements on their writing, but like the previous study, there were concerns about AI's effectiveness regarding its ability to help them augment more nuanced aspects of their writing and to address higher order writing skills. I want to look at two more studies though. The next is Parker et al. 2023. And this is an early study that used ChatGPT 3.5 for automated writing evaluation on 42 nursing student papers, 18 of which were undergraduate and 24 were graduate. And like study number one, it also used a detailed rubric as part of this ChatGPT feedback. This particular rubric assessed 5 criteria, evaluating each one on a 3-point scale. And the initial findings suggest that when comparing the GPT rating and a benchmark human score, that the AI tended to grade more strictly than the human output, thus helping learners to improve their grammar and structure. As sort of a side result, some of the students noted that this level of feedback helped to boost their confidence in their writing abilities. Like other studies, however, one limitation was that ChatGPT 3.5, which as a reminder is the first public version of ChatGPT, struggled with evaluating discipline-specific content. Now, lastly, looking at Ustan et al. 2024, and this is a preprint, this study compared the performance on 2 assignments in a graduate level course. And with these 2 assignments, AI was not permitted on the first assignment, and it was allowed on the second assignment. As part of the study, the instructors and the AI analyzed student writing across 8 subtasks using a detailed rubric once again, and also surveyed their perceptions regarding Gen AI utility. The researchers found that from the first assignment to the second assignment, that generative AI use seems to have improved grades in terms of criteria like organization, style, and flow, as well as they saw an overall increase in grades with an average from B+ moving to an A. Students also reported that they were able to write more quickly with the use of AI, but similarly felt that AI didn't offer the research assistance that they would have liked. One point I do want to note is that non-native speakers seem to have benefited the most from this experiment. In terms of limitations, AI use was restricted in the first assignment and permitted in the second, so we want to take into account the fact that all factors were not equal in terms of comparing those 2 assignments. Now, I want to take a second just to consider 4 key takeaways that we might consider from these studies. The first is that they suggest that generative AI can provide timely, detailed, and consistent feedback, particularly when combined with a rubric. And in the context of graduate level writing, this kind of scaffolding can support revisions and prepare novice researchers for higher order critiques. Secondly, the study suggests that generative AI feedback can lead to potential improvements in writing quality. Thirdly, Parker et al. Especially suggests that timely and actionable feedback from generative AI tools can help reduce student anxiety while encouraging iterative refinement. And lastly, And the broader context is that the implementation of AI for formative feedback can help students also build essential skills like AI literacy, which entails gaining competencies in using AI systems, as well as expertise in evaluating AI output. And finally, it can also help novice researchers with additional experience responding to or incorporating feedback, or what some people call feedback literacy. And next slide, please. All right, next I'm going to give a brief overview of a study examining the potential usefulness of AI for feedback on research papers. And here again, the scholarship is still limited. Nevertheless, we'll just jump in. So in this study, using ChatGPT-4, which as a reminder, ChatGPT-4 was replaced in 2024 of last year, May 2024. So this is an outdated version. Researchers sought to answer the question, can generative AI provide reliable feedback for academic researchers? And this study consisted of two components. So the first was a retrospective evaluation in which human peer reviews were compared with AI-generated reviews. And the second component of the study was a prospective user study in which a smaller self-selecting pool of participants were asked to rate their experience using ChatGPT for feedback. So looking at the first row, in terms of the retrospective portion, the researchers assessed the content of overlap, the nature or the extent of overlap between human and AI feedback, looking at 3,096 papers in the Nature family journals and 1,709 papers in the ICLR conference family of the data set. In the first category, researchers found approximately 57.4% overlap between ChatGPT-4 and at least one human reviewer, whereas in the second group, the researchers found a 77.18% overlap between ChatGPT and at least one human reviewer's comments. So I think this level of overlap is noteworthy. Additionally, to account for the possibility that some of the feedback could have been generic, the researchers then shuffled the feedback and found that when they compared the shuffle feedback to the papers, that the percentage of overlap dropped from approximately 1 to 4%, indicating that ChatGPT-4's comments were indeed manuscript specific. All right. In terms of the perspective part, let's look down at the self-selecting user's perspective. So as an additional component to the study, the researchers then solicited feedback from the ICLR group, asking them to give feedback regarding the usefulness of AI-generated feedback that they had received using a five-point Likert scale. And using this scale, 50.3% rated ChatGPT-4 feedback as useful. Additionally, 20.1% said the feedback was as useful as human reviews, while 18.8% said it was in fact more helpful than many human reviews. Now, just to expound upon that a little, they were asked to say what they thought were some of the reasons for the utility of this Gen AI feedback, and they pointed to things like the timeliness of the feedback, ease of use, the opportunity for fresh perspectives, and the possibility to receive accurate and thorough feedback. Overall, the study suggests that AI-generated feedback might be beneficial for some researchers. Of course, again, there are some limitations. For example, the fact that similarity might not always translate into quality of feedback. So, of course, there's still more work to be done there. All right, next slide, please. Okay, since we're on the topic of thinking about the utility of generative AI in terms of developing or refining one's manuscript, we just wanted to pause for a moment and provide an example of one best practice in case you or your student should decide to use Gen AI in your research or writing process. And so this is a sample AI disclosure statement. This is something that many journals that permit the use of generative AI are now requiring and part of the publication process. So this is an example statement from the Journal of Materials Research and Technology. And we see in the declaration that the authors have taken great care to mention specifically which model they used and for what particular purposes they used the model, while also saying, of course, that they take full responsibility. This is also an exemplar that I took from the European Association of Science Editors. All right, and now I'm going to hand the presentation back over to Adam, who's going to talk a little bit more about additional uses for AI in the manuscript development process.
Thanks, Emily. So now you have a glimpse of some practical ways that researchers can use and benefit from AI. Next, I would like to imagine what the future could entail. So if and when journals and publishers finally endorse AI, its many uses, I think one of the first strategies that could be employed would be to use AI as a screening mechanism. In other words, to screen the quality of manuscript submissions. So why might journals want to do this? Well, I think the single best answer is because of the peer reviewer shortage. So why is there a peer reviewer shortage? Well, the sheer number of research articles that are now being submitted to journals has grown significantly over the years, thereby placing a strain on the available pool of reviewers. In addition, peer review is typically a voluntary service with little to no direct reward, leading to a reluctance to participate for many researchers. And reviewing papers, for those who have done it, of course, you know it requires a lot of time and energy and effort, which can, of course, conflict with researchers' primary responsibilities. And as research fields become increasingly specialized, finding qualified reviewers with the necessary expertise could be challenging as well. And lastly, and also unfortunately, the reality is that a small percentage of researchers often end up reviewing a disproportionate number of papers, while many others may contribute very little. And so one possible solution to address the peer reviewer shortage is to deploy AI to screen and perhaps review manuscripts. But how close are we to this actually happening? And is AI going to be good enough to screen manuscripts? Even though AI peer-assisted reviews are currently not allowed or not permitted and are ill-advised, I still wanted to know if AI could handle the task. So recognize that I'm an associate editor for the journal called Anatomical Sciences Education. And for that journal, I recently wrote and published guidelines for survey-based research. And these guidelines were meant to help contributors and other editors by outlining the key content that should be included in survey-based studies. So naturally, I was very curious and wanted to know, well, could AI serve as a screening mechanism to detect missing guideline information within manuscripts? So to put this to the test, we first loaded ASC's survey-based guidelines to ChatGPT 01, and then I randomly pulled 5 published articles with survey-based designs from a competitor journal, the Journal of Clinical Anatomy. I then reviewed the AI outcomes against the contents of the 5 articles to see how accurate the AI outputs were. Here's a quick glimpse of the guidelines for survey-based research. Most of these guidelines entail the journal's expectations for the content that should be included in manuscripts with survey-based designs. And as you notice, the formatting here is in a checkbox format to help make it as easy to use as possible. So effectively, this is the document that we uploaded to ChatGPT 01. And here's the verbatim AI output for the very first article that we ran. So the green text here highlights all of AI's suggestions that I would have returned to the authors because I agreed with AI's critique. So in this particular instance, of the 13 points representing areas for improvement, I agreed with 12 of them. So in other words, 92% of the AI feedback was what I deemed to be both accurate and usable. And here are the outcomes across all 5 published studies that we compared against ASC's guidelines for survey-based research. The accuracy of the feedback ranged from 77% to 92%, and the overall mean was 88%. So this suggests that on average, I would have felt comfortable returning about 88% of AI's feedback to the authors for making improvements. So in my opinion, the outcomes of this small pilot study do suggest to me that AI is capable of serving as a journal screening mechanism, especially because of how well it detected missing information across all these various studies. All right, so even though AI may be good enough, in my opinion, to be used for manuscript screening, before this can happen, the current resistance to AI has to subside. So recognize that the NIH has implemented a ban on using generative AI tools for analyzing research and for drafting peer review comments. And similarly, the International Committee on Medical Journal Editors has fallen in line as well, and they suggest that reviewers should not upload unpublished manuscripts to AI platforms. Additionally, reviewers should disclose to the journal whether and how AI technology was used in evaluating manuscripts for drafting reviewer comments. Now, the primary impetus for these restrictions from these various organizations is really due to the lack of clear and transparent protections. In other words, a lack of confidentiality for the information that is being uploaded to the AI systems. Effectively, the argument is that once the information is uploaded, of course, oftentimes that information contains intellectual property. There's really no control over how that information is used and really no evidence of where it's going. So for those reasons, these organizations are choosing to be conservative in their approach. All right, to round out the presentation, Colleen Shaverko was kind enough to supply us one of her scored NSF grants so we could get a taste of whether AI could help improve grant writing or not. So for this mini experiment, we first uploaded the NSF grant requirements to 3 different systems, to ChatGPT-o1, ChatGPT-4o, as well as Microsoft Copilot. And then next, we uploaded Dr. Shaverko's NSF grant to all 3 systems, which then returned feedback on the grant. And then to help us gauge the usefulness of the AI feedback, Dr. Shaverko did an informal thematic review comparing the AI system outputs against the human reviewers. And to help guide the informal analysis, I asked Colleen to respond to these 4 questions. Now, in just a moment, I'll have Colleen weigh in with her thoughts, but for now, let me just give you the highlights. So overall, she felt that ChatGPT-o1 was moderately helpful, and it aligned best with the human reviewers' comments. And of all the AI comments that were generated, about half aligned with the human reviewers' comments or suggestions. And when asked if she would use AI in this way in the future, well, she said maybe. So Dr. Shaverko, thanks so much for being a guest panelist with us today. Would you kindly provide your thoughts and elaborate on your experience in using AI to provide feedback on your grant?
Sure. So first, something to point out is that this is already a funded grant. So I gave Adam and Emily the original grant that we had submitted that got rejected. And then it had already gotten funded by this time on re-review on the second submission. The other thing is, in terms of intellectual property, it's a really unique grant with a really unique question. And so, well, there's theoretically an issue with intellectual property. I don't want to say not concerned, but less concerned than I think others might be for this particular example. Overall, about half of the comments from ChatGPT-o1 were in line with what the reviewer said. For all 3 of the AI softwares, all 3 of them came up with the one major issue that was identified by the human reviewers. But then for the other two major areas that we had to address and change, they really fell short on those two. I think two of them at least identified a third, but the thing that helped us with the third in terms of getting funded was actually the panelist comments back and suggestions back, which we would not have thought of those comments or those suggestions on our own, and AI was not going to help us with those either. In general, I think that keeping this as a potential method for help or to generate ideas and to generate conversation between collaborators might be a good approach. But the general approach should also be, you can't address all of these comments. You have to identify what the key points are and move on, as opposed to going line by line and trying to address every single comment, because there were just too many given the rubric that we submitted.
All right, thank you, Colleen. And when we open the floor for Q&A, we'll involve Colleen in that as well, so you can ask her questions directly about her experience as you see fit. All right, so we've made it here to the end, so I just want to give you kind of the mile-high summary or overview of what we've covered and what some of our very, very preliminary pilot evidence is suggesting. So in summary, I think our pilot preliminary evidence does start to suggest that AI systems can perform similarly to humans on rating and grading tasks, especially when the AI system is given a well-defined rubric or framework to work with. Additionally, these AI systems, it seems, are able to judge the quality of research studies, again, using a rubric such as Mirsky, just as well as humans can. And so, as I said before, this is very enticing to me because I do a lot of this type of work, and it could actually save a lot of time and be just as accurate as human raters. Thirdly, AI systems can provide some useful information and feedback on manuscript development, whether it's to students and or experienced researchers. And AI systems, I think, are at the point where they are now capable of screening manuscripts, again, according to guidelines, in order to identify areas for improvement. And as you heard from Colleen, of course, it could be useful as well for improving research grant submissions. So a lot of similar utility here in how we have structured these mini experiments, but nonetheless, hopefully this has given you a better sense and new perspective on AI's current capabilities and where AI is likely to be headed as it relates to uses in research as well as uses in scientific publishing. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to dig into a lot of the limitations or challenges. If you want to ask some of those questions in the Q&A, that's perfectly fine. We can tell you some of the woes that we experienced in uploading the rubrics, for example, if you want that level of detail. But for now, I'd like to kind of leave it here at this level to give you kind of this information to ponder in how you might use this type of information in your own research processes. So next, I'm going to just turn it over briefly to Emily for some updates regarding upcoming events. She's going to clue you in on the next events that are upcoming. And then after that, we're going to open the floor for the Q&A session. And as part of the Q&A, I would love to hear how you're either using AI in your research practices currently, or I would love to hear how one of these mini experiments may have given you an idea for how to use it in your own work. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time. Emily, give us the updates on the next events.
Sure. All right. So just before we move into Q&A, I wanted to highlight a few upcoming events. The next is a session on AI foundations and future competencies for AI use in healthcare. In March, we'll actually be having an in-person hands-on session as a sort of continuation of this AI in research series to explore some hands-on applications of AI for research. And then on March 24th, we will have a session on clinical applications of Gen AI with guest facilitator, Dr. Jethan Skibow. So keep your eyes out for those invites. I also put in the chat our feedback form. So we do ask that since this is a workshop on feedback, and in general, we'd love to hear your feedback. If you take a few minutes to let us know how you thought things went today. And I think we're ready to open it up for questions.
Yeah, before we do, let me just comment a little bit more on this second bullet point for this hands-on application. So if you have something in mind that you want us to test or pilot to see how it works with generative AI, let us know. We would love to have your very specific examples. We would love to run those through a mini experiment, just like we've done here, and then we could share that with you at that event on the 19th. So please feel free to reach out to me or Emily directly if you have some ideas for other mini experiments that you would like to see conducted. All right, let's open the floor for Q&A. Who has used AI in research processes, or who has now a better idea of how you might actually do it now that you've seen some examples?
Hi, I was just gonna add, thank you for the wonderful talk and summary of all the different tools and ways to use AI for research. I have used AI in gathering like articles, like network. I think Research Rabbit is the tool that's out there for networking different papers together. So you can upload papers and it'll kind of find like related work. So I haven't used generative AI for research, but I have used, other forms of AI for research. So this is good to start thinking about, how it could improve some of the processes of synthesizing literature over decades or however it is that we want to synthesize before we actually produce something new.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming very possible to deal with even larger data sets of literature, right? Even larger systematic reviews, meta-analyses, et cetera, just because of how easy it's becoming to synthesize some of this information using AI in particular. And I'll also mention, you mentioned Research Rabbit. If you didn't check out the first workshop series on literature reviews, I would encourage you to do that. It had some other systems, AI systems that we discussed there as well. So we kind of compared head-to-head Research Rabbit against SciSpace and others. So check that one out if you're interested.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. Adam, one asks if you would want to comment on the standard deviation between AI and the human feedback for the Manuscript reviews.
The answer is no, not really. No, I have not really delved into why that was possibly the case, whereby AI had higher standard deviations than the humans. And if I'm being honest, I don't remember if the human ratings was a single individual going through all 22 papers, or if it was split between two individuals. I would have to go back to our study design to kind of get the specifics of how that occurred so that I could make a better judgment about why these differences exist. So in a nutshell, I don't have a good explanation for why that was happening.
Also a question for Colleen in the chat. And Colleen, the question is, what was the time gap between the human and the AI reviews that you received? With the suggestion that maybe the research field may have already advanced by the time you received the AI feedback.
Yeah, so I actually just put my response in, but basically Adam generated the AI reviews, or someone generated the AI reviews, I think last week. And we had received the human reviews in January 2023. So I think that that's a fair comment and concern, but I don't think it's applicable here. One, it was based on the rubric. Most of the reviews were based on the rubric and not necessarily based on like deep content. And then two, the field that I work in tends to work at a snail's pace. So I don't think that it got outstripped in terms of timing.
Has anyone else tried to upload their grants to get feedback from AI?
I used it to kind of go through manuscripts to look for clarity. So our journals for kind of like my field's like major overarching thing require you to send it through PaperPal. I don't know, initially, as like a free service, and then you could pay to have it corrected, which I haven't done yet. But I've used like sections just in ChatGPT, and sometimes it's really helpful, and sometimes it simplifies it to the point where it's not saying the same thing. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag. But I mean, I hadn't really thought about the intellectual property part, but I don't think my stuff is that interesting that anyone's really, I don't know, on the look for it. But I thought that was an interesting comment to make as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
If I can interject, I think the intellectual property part is a component, and that's something that in our mini experiments, we took special pains to make sure that we chose models in which we could disable the model training. And additionally, especially for Colleen's content, I also used temporary chat. So it was another layer of security. So we used ChatGPT and Copilot, which offer secure options. It's tempting. A new model is emerging that is supposed to rival ChatGPT 01 called DeepSeek, that has even better reasoning capabilities and is taught by reinforcement learning. So it has a different training approach, but anytime you put content into that model, you automatically opt into the training. So I think, of course, while it might be tempting, of course, we wouldn't want to put academic research into that model.
Yeah, and Russia is supposed to be getting a central node as well, which may add another level of security, at least in-house, so that we could do some of this type of stuff without, the risk of intellectual property going off into the ether, et cetera. So I think, in due time, there will be more protections surrounding that. Peg, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on your question? I'm not sure I'm following exactly.
Sorry, I was having trouble finding my button. I guess I was just asking if, I mean, I trust this 100% in your hands or in any of the experienced researchers' hands, but I do worry about, like, that's one of the reasons why I'm such a proponent of teaching about AI, because I worry that the younger cadre is going to just be all excited about things and go out and just start submitting without actually doing the really careful work that you guys and following the careful protocols that you do. Or am I just being, like I said, cynical?
No, yeah, so I think I'm following your comment now. So I will say in general that the reliability and validity component to this is extremely critical, right? It's the old paradigm, garbage in equals garbage out. If you don't have the basis for reliability and validity with these systems, then you can't expect the outputs to be reliable or valid either. So from that perspective, in my mind, that's where some of the literature is currently headed, right? It's to do all these checks and balances to ensure there is enough reliability to actually use it in certain circumstances and contexts, et cetera. Of course, as you know, a lot of work has been done on the AI-assisted diagnosis side, whether it's with pathology or with radiography, et cetera. And a lot of those meta-analyses, even across multiple studies, are returning a lot of very promising findings. But that same type of work also needs to trickle down to and across all of our various disciplines, just to ensure that there's not something more nuanced that we're doing that would trip the system up or make it act in a different way, et cetera. So it really is a critical step in the process to validate all of these types of practices and procedures before we can simply just trust these systems and assume that they're doing what we intend them to do.
Right. And I guess I would ask who, and this, this is who determines all that? Like, who's writing the rules now?
I mean, I think as researchers, part of that onus is on us, right? So we're submitting work that is using AI, but the underlying AI validity hasn't been done, then that's on you to prove that, right? Whether it's supplemental appendices or through a parent study, et cetera. So I think a lot of it falls on us as the end users to have to discern and produce some of the outcomes of that type of work.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah. All right, does anyone have any ideas for the next March event? Are there any mini experiments that you've kind of been waiting to hear about, but we haven't touched on yet? Like, what do you want us to do next? What do you want us to try next?
Hey, Adam. Thanks again to you, Emily, and the team for putting this together. I did have a question for maybe for an upcoming webinar, maybe not soon, but at some point. There was an article that came out in The Economist yesterday about the underlying costs of these models, which are not fully represented yet in what we're paying to access them, and some perspective maybe from IT in terms of, like where this is going. And I'm a little squeamish about getting too reliant on a technology that I'll inevitably perhaps not be able to afford down the road.
Yeah, not only that, but the Rush system and cybersecurity, et cetera, have in some ways put up what I'll call some roadblocks to make it challenging for us to get reimbursed for using such systems or to pilot such systems. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what you're talking about is, as a whole, as a Rush University, where are we headed with AI, and to what extent are we going to be able to use and rely on some of the newer technology to allow us to do our work?
I just want to jump in and say thanks for that question, Andy. That in fact, in our next workshop on February 20th, we will be addressing some of those questions within the context of AI literacy. And then also just to throw out a teaser, where I want to go from AI literacy is discussing what the development of AI competencies might also look like. So I just put in the chat a document it came out last week from the International Advisory Committee for Artificial Intelligence. And one of the things that strikes me connecting today's workshop to future workshops is if we look at Matrix 1, one of the specific recommendations for AI educators is thinking about, I guess I would call it developing AI research competencies and research mentoring competencies. So those are some of the things that I think we'll start to address further in the next workshop as well. And someone mentioned the environmental impact. That will certainly come up also. Other questions, I'd love to hear more about the question that Adam posited about what kind of experiments would you like to see next?
Maybe I'll chip in again since you asked the question, Emily, but before ChatGPT showed up on the scene, I had done some work with natural language processing, which was a much more onerous approach. And I'm wondering, is anybody doing work I would call the broad umbrella sense making? So it's taking large reams of research and automating the process of calling out nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, so that is being done, I would say, through different AI systems, such as SciSpace, for example. You can call a lot of information together to get very quick, succinct summary outputs for methods, for results, for discussions, conclusions, etc. Not only that, but a lot of the major players, Web of Science, JSTOR, etc., are starting to beta test AI within their own platforms so that there can be quick summations of large amounts of data whenever you do a single search, right, for a certain topic. So yeah, I think that is certainly in the works already. It's just a matter of kind of finding the system that is going to work best in your existing research practices and the system that is going to cater to the types of articles that you want to find. Obviously, with the large players like Web of Knowledge getting into the mix here, it's going to become a lot easier to find the high level kind of articles that are behind closed doors because other systems right now are relying largely on open access stuff. which, may not be the best for the type of work that one needs to do. So I think we're getting close to seeing a lot of that come to fruition, just a matter of a few months, probably.
I would just add that if you look at some of the scholarship, especially George Siemens has been really active in that area. So he's building on his foundational work in connectivism and has now been addressing issues of sense making in AI. So that might, in terms of the scholarly literature, that might be a useful starting point.
Could you throw that name in the chat?
Sure,
Me,
yeah.
Emily? Thank you.
George Siemens, and he also had a recent article with Gasevich, some foundational idea. It was, I think, a 2022 article about some foundational thoughts about implications for AI in education. I can look up that reference and follow up with that.
All right, everyone, we are near the top of the hour. Thank you so much again for your participation and for joining today. Emily and I will stick around for just a few minutes. If you have other pressing questions, let us know. Otherwise, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much. Take care.